welcome to the Saving with Steve show, where we talk about the ins and outs of money, pretty much everything on the sun relates to you having a happier, healthier relationship with money. My name is Steve Sexton. I want to thank you for joining us. Hey, we just exceeded 1 million listeners, so I want to thank you all for sharing us with your friends and family. And you know what? We're going to give you some wonderful information today. One of the interesting things with all the stuff that's been going on economically, today we're focusing on something that is important to all of us, whether you're working or not. That's your 401k basics. We're going to be talking about common blind spots, Roth conversions, how to think about it. Is it the right time, wrong time? The other thing that's important is stress testing a retirement plan. And I think one of the big things about that is too many people leap before they really stress test to see if it makes sense. And one of the big things that we're going to start with once we get going with our guest is, many people over 50 overestimate the value of savings and underestimate the value of a strategy. Now, to help us out with all this, we have Dr. Stephan Shipe. He's a Ph.D. certified financial analyst, certified financial planner, is a finance professor at Wake Forest University. He's the founder of Scholar Finance Advising, a fiduciary service with clients in 39 states. The mission is to educate, empower, encourage to help individuals gain clarity and confidence around personal finances. Stephan, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. So many people are looking forward to this, so I just want to say I appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Excited to jump into it. Lots of good stuff to discuss when it comes to the strategy side and the 401k side of things.
Perfect. But before we get into that, all of our listeners love to know, why'd you get going? Why'd you get into the business you're in? I mean, quite frankly, if you look at it, you're a PhD, a CFA, which I know is very, very significant in the finance industry, and a certified financial planner. So you've got a lot of education. So what prompted you to get that education, get into this business?
Yeah. It's been a long road. Lots of different credentials and time that's gone into it. I think I've always been fascinated with finance. I've loved finance for so long, and the first step was really the PhD. Went to grad school, started to really dive into the inner workings of finance, how it works, where the theory came from, where the original papers that establish a lot of the common rules that we see today came from somewhere. So being able to jump into those, and what really shifted for me was I had the experience out in grad school of someone trying to pitch me whole life insurance as a grad student, and we went through this whole process. I couldn't believe, because my research at the time was all on conflicts of interest and executive compensation structures for companies. So I was completely immersed in this whole world, and ended up digging into this a little bit further, finding out that this person didn't have to disclose at all how much he was going to make on any of these insurance contracts and the annuities and everything. And that sent me down a whole new rabbit hole of the conflicts of interest of investment advisors, and ended up teaching at the University of New Hampshire, wrote a few papers on fee structures of advisors, conflicts of interest, did some work with the state of Massachusetts, or I'm sorry, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, on rules and disclosures around helping people understand how much their advisor was charging them for financial advice, and had the unfortunate pleasure of keynoting one of their advisor events, where my job was to go and justify why it was good that clients knew how much they were being charged by their financial advisor. And after that, decided it was time to start a firm, and very different than kind of the common ways to run an advisory firm. We decided not to charge any assets under management fees. We don't manage any money. We don't have any commission products. It's pure pay for advice, just like you would go to an attorney or an accountant for advice. And it's been so much fun. It's great just talking to our clients. They are educated. They're interested in topics like we're going to be talking about today. What are the strategy components? What goes into making a decision around conversions, or how much they can contribute to accounts and all that. So this big wave of DIY investors that is built up, but a lot of times they're not looking for someone to manage the money as it is someone to just tell them what buttons to push, right? And what they should be thinking about, or validate the plans that they've had. So it's been so much fun that we continue to grow. We work clients all over the country, and I love it. It's been fantastic.
I know a number of people who are engineers and doctors and accountants and people like that, and they love doing it themselves, but they love finding out everything they can. But more
Yes.
importantly, they love somebody else doing all the analysis for them.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's going, there's so much of this is that there's not a one size fits all approach to anything, right? In
Oh,
finance.
hey,
It
everybody's different. I
really is.
totally
And
get
it's
that.
what's great about it is, what's the more interesting component of that is really seeing what are the levers that you pull and how that impacts the plan. So a lot of times when we're giving it advice, it's not as much us dictating this is exactly what you have to do as much as this is what we think you should do. But here's what it looks like if you did that conversion up to the 24% bracket. And here's what it looks like if you contributed to Roth opposed to traditional. So that way they end up having that information to still make the call themselves of
Hmm.
what they're going to do, but have the have a more educated decision on knowing what those impacts are going to be on other aspects of their finances.
Yeah, and then there's the big thing that why everybody's different is because it's their lens. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's their tax situation, their finance situation. Everybody's different, so that's very, very interesting. So one of the things that I'd like to start with is the question of many people over 50 overestimate the value of savings more than underestimate the power of a strategy. So help us understand that. So how, what does that mean? What does that mean to people? What should people be thinking?
Yeah, I think the difference is that what ends up happening is once you get over 50, you hit this inflection point with your finances. And this is something that I don't think people really see to your point of when you're 25, 30, and you're saving into your accounts for retirement, you are doing all the work, right? You should ignore whatever the market's doing at that point because it's irrelevant. The market could have the best year ever, and the $10,000 you threw in there is going to mean more to your account that year than any market movement that's going on. So you end up having the shift of if you think about your portfolio growth as two components. One, how much you're adding in, and then how much the market is adding in.
Hmm.
First, start off, it's all savings. Right? The difference between getting from 25 to 45 and from a success perspective is mostly the savings component. It's you've got to brute force that account up. What ends up happening though is you end up hitting the other side of that compound interest curve where now you run into this issue of my contributions are starting to matter less and less. And
Hmm.
what's starting to matter more is the type of allocation that I'm in. Tax efficiency comes in. So maybe I shouldn't have the same allocation in my 401k as I have in my brokerage account as I have in my Roth, because all of them are going to be taxed differently in the future. And it's going to impact my ability to do Roth conversions or my ability to retire early or my ability to withdraw from these accounts in the future from a liquidity perspective. So that's what starts to shift after 50 is you start looking at that timeline and saying, when is retirement in your mind, right? Because if you're 50 and your retirement is 65, that's a lot different than you being 50 and saying, I might want to retire in the next 5, 7 years. Because we have to worry about what if the market drops in the next couple of years. If the market drops, you're 50 and you're not retiring until 65, it's not going to be as big of a deal. If the market drops and you're 50 and you want to retire at 55, big deal, right? We
Oh
need to
yeah.
make sure there's liquidity there. We need to make sure that you're taking into account things like health insurance costs before 65 and where that income is going to come from. Are you going to get ACA credits? Are you going to be able to afford private insurance during that time? At that point, it really does shift the way you think about retirement and say, we've done the savings component. There was no worrying about retirement. I talked to someone who's 35 or 40 and they're talking about retirement strategy. And the goal for them should be right, focus on saving. We just gotta you have to brute force those accounts up. When we get into 50, 55, and 60, that conversation, the brute forcing saving, it's still going to save. But what becomes more important is the strategy that you're talking about. That's why, because
Hmm.
your account now is kind of outside of your control to an extent, right? It's growing whether you want it to or not.
Hmm.
So we have to make sure it's growing in the right places, mostly from a tax concern.
Hmm. So basically what you're saying is you're now focusing on the strategy of creating an income tax reduction, making sure I preserve this for my next portion of my life, so to speak,
Yeah.
because essentially I'm going to be unemployed, so I don't have a paycheck and I have to create it on my own. The other big thing is when we look at taxation is the lower the taxes are, the more you keep. So trying to just grow it doesn't always make the most sense, even though you still want to do that. So you just really need to take a look at all those things. And then obviously you have things like life expectancy involved there. So if your whole family lives till 95 to 100, it's a different story. And if your whole family lives till 65 and you're 60, it's a big difference too. I mean, that's kind of compressing a little bit, but those are the things that people really, really, really want to be taking a look at. Okay. Um, Folks, stick with us. We're going to be right back with more Saving with Steve and Stephan Shipe. Perfect. Hey, Cameron, let's see. We just finished segment one, and we're going to be moving into segment two. So here we go. Okay. This is perfect. You've done this obviously 100 times, right?
Yeah, the advantage of lecturing on these topics for 10 years.
Oh
A
yeah.
lot.
No, no, you come across really smooth and easy and all that kind of stuff, and it's easy for people to understand, even though they're not a college student or a graduate student, so it works out real well. So, all right. Cameron, we're moving into segment two with Stephan Shipe, episode 246. So come on. There we go. Five, four, three, two, one. Hey, welcome back to the Saving with Steve show, where we talk about the ins and outs of money. I just want to truly thank you for sharing us with your friends and family. I appreciate it. All the replays are available at savingwithsteve.us. If you're enjoying the stories of helpful insight on Saving with Steve, I encourage you to check out our YouTube page. So you don't miss a show. Check out a few of our affiliates at UK Health Radio, BBS Radio, Talk Radio, New York City, AM/FM 360, E3, Las Vegas TV networks. All the networks are dedicated to empowering you to live a life of personal financial freedom. And you know what? We're coming right back. I want to talk about more of this stuff with Stephan Shipe, CFP, Certified Financial Analyst, Ph.D. Finance. He operates, with clients that are all over the country in 39 states. But now we're talking about 401ks. So let's get into the 401k basics, and then let's talk about the common blind spots that people just don't see and that could possibly hurt them, and how they should be looking at it. So Steve, let's go with the 401k basics. I know this for a PhD and a CFA and a CFP, it's probably pretty basic, but there's a lot of people out there that have had 401ks for decades that don't really know how they truly work.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump into it. It's such a huge component of a financial plan because for many people, it's a major aspect of their savings, right? This is the main savings vehicle that they'll have. So I, the basics of it, and we can get into the weeds, so to speak, of where some of the missteps typically are. So the 401k is going to allow you and usually your employer to contribute toward your retirement. And there's limits associated with that. It could be $23,000 a year and more if you're over 50. You get a little bit of a catch up there, a little bonus that you're going to be dealing with. And you're going to be in control of the investments for that 401k. And this was sort of a replacement for the pension system before. So generations ago, you talk about more about having pensions associated for retirement, where the employer took all the risk that they had to invest for all their employees for their retirement. 401k system was the replacement to say, hey, we need to move some of this risk off of the company and onto the employee themselves. So they are now controlling how their financial future is going to look, and we'll help them maybe with a match or anything there. The issues we typically run into is just a misunderstanding around how those, even the basics, work. I don't know how many times I hear I can't do a Roth contribution to my 401k because I make too much. Right? And there's a huge difference there between a Roth IRA and a Roth 401k. A Roth IRA, you absolutely have limits on income, but a Roth 401k, there are no limits on an income perspective. So that becomes a major factor. And sometimes that solves the Roth conversion problems that people have of just knowing, hey, I could have been contributing to Roth this whole time, or I wish I would have known that earlier. From a basics, you really want, going back to our conversation around strategy, you can't take the understanding that your employer has your back, in the sense of your employer is not managing these investments, right? That is, you have now the control over your investments. They got rid of that when they got rid of the pensions. So it's your job to go in and make sure that the allocations that you're choosing, the funds you're choosing, make sense for your future. And I'd say the fees are the big one there. There's all of these are going to have fees associated with them, expense ratios that are associated with them. The days of 1-2% fees have really gone away. They're still there. You have to watch out for them. So I'm not saying they've gone away completely. They've gone away in the sense of usually you can find some lower cost funds that are going to be included in the 401k as good options for you.
Mhm.
So that's going to be one area. Making sure you're taking care of the match that's there. If your employer is matching up to 6%, just because they're matching up to 6% or 4% or whatever it is, doesn't mean that that's your max that you should be going into. It really should be, I mean, good rules of thumb are somewhere between 10 to 20% savings is what should be going into a 401k. So if your employer is matching your first 3% and you're throwing in 3%, you're not there. You're not even halfway there to even somewhere in the middle of where you want to be. So, and a good secret to that one is generally if you can go and even if you have to start and say, well, that sounds crazy, right? I can't go from the 3% or 4% that I'm putting in and go up to 12%. That's going to be way too big of a jump. Then do this incrementally, right? Every year you go in and move it up 1%. Anyone can look at their budget and say, I could live on 1% less this year. And that's a lot easier to deal with than taking this huge jump. And then anytime you get a bonus, right? Anytime you get a raise, to go in and take that raise and cut the raise in half. You get a 2%, 3% raise, and go ahead and allocate 1% or 2% of that to you personally, and another 1 or 2% to that 401k to really build you up to that level that you're shooting for.
Okay, so I have a couple um, viewers ask the question
Yeah.
because they want to understand, like we talked about a Roth 401k, a regular 401k. What about a non-deductible 401k? How does that work and how much can you contribute?
Yeah, so that's a big one. So this is the the grail allocation that you can get, right? If you can have a 401k that allows you to do both Roth contributions to your 401k up to the 23,000 and allows non-deductible after-tax contributions to the account. This is the holy grail. This is the one you want, right? And if you don't have it, it's a great opportunity to ask an employer to see if they can offer for you because it really doesn't affect the employer too much, right? It's not doesn't mean that they're adding more to it. What this is going to do is the limit is $69,000 that you can add to a 401k a year that includes both employer and employee contributions. Right? So if you put in your 23,000 and maybe your employer is throwing in $10,000 or $5,000 to it, maybe they get you to 30. Well, there's $39,000 there as a gap that you legally have access to only if your plan allows you to make after-tax non-Roth contributions. And I'm glad you brought this up because this is a common misconception. Even when people call in, we have clients who call, their broker or their custodian, whoever they're using for the 401k. They said, no, they said I can make after-tax contributions. When really the person on the other end thinks they mean Roth contributions, right?
Mhm.
These are completely different. These are non-Roth after-tax contributions. Now, what will happen is you can add those to the account up to that $69,000. So now we're putting $39,000 extra into this 401k. And any growth that happens, though, is going to be taxed or tax deferred, right? So there's no tax benefit up front of doing this. So a lot of people say, well, what's the point, right? Why am I going to throw that money in there when I could put it in my brokerage account? The point is usually these plans are set up in a way where you can do an in-plan Roth conversion, which means you can go take this $39,000 that you just threw in the account that you've already paid tax on, and then immediately convert that money to Roth within the 401k. It's known as a mega backdoor Roth contribution. Great name for it. And you pull,
Mega backdoor.
and now you have thousands of dollars, over $50,000 that you've been able to contribute to Roth throughout the year. And that is unheard of. I mean, so many people focus on, I'm going to put $7,000 into a Roth IRA on the year. I'm going to do a backdoor Roth or something like that to get $7,000 when they miss out completely on the fact that they may be able to do $50,000, $60,000 into a Roth using the after-tax contributions. Now, the mistake that will come up though, and we've seen this happen, is people will go and contribute to their after-tax contribution in their 401k and not convert it. And let's say and I've had this happen where we've had clients go through and say, for the past 10 years, I've been maxing out my 401k and adding all the max after-tax contributions I can do. So they'll go and add $30,000 a year for 10 years. So now they've had $300,000 of contributions. Plus, market's been good. That money's doubled over that time. So now they have $600,000 in after tax. When they go to convert that over to Roth, that $300,000 in earnings is all taxable now. If they would have just gone and every year made their $30,000 contribution and then converted it over, then all of that growth would have been tax-free. It would have been in a Roth. I mean, that's a major misstep that is super easy to make, because you look and say, well, I'm going to contribute this much to after tax, so I'm good. And they forget the conversion part. And in that case, that mistake costs hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax.
Okay, I have another question. This is a few people, they were want to know if there's an out. I don't think there is, but here's what's happened. They actually funded for a number of years the non-deductible 401k.
Yep.
They stopped for 4 or 5 years because they didn't think they needed to, because they're paying off debt and all that before they wanted to retire. And now what they have done is they've rolled everything over, the non-deductible 401k and the regular 401k, into an IRA. Are they stuck? Are they paying taxes twice on money they already paid taxes on, or is there a way to roll it back out? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually the deductibility of IRAs is on the owner of the IRA to track, right?
Mm,
So it is. I think they would have an argument to make, and this is definitely a more in the CPA realm than my realm,
mhm,
getting in that gray area. But I think there is, and the reason I say that, I can give you some background of why I would say there may be it out there, because if you have a traditional IRA that includes deductible and non-deductible contributions, what I have seen done before is people will roll the tax deferred as portion of their IRA into a 401k and then convert the non-deductible portion over to Roth to clear out their IRAs to get around what's known as a pro rata rule
mhm.
for Roths. So because it works that way, I imagine, and again, this is a little bit more on the tax side than
No, I'm with you. There's just
but that's where that is definitely, I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have with a CPA to say, could we go and say, I have now, let's say, $500,000 in a rollover IRA, and $300,000 of that I've had is non-deductible. Could I go and convert all of this and take into account the fact that there's a non-deductible portion? That sounds right to me as an option.
mhm,
I definitely know that you'd be able to roll over the deductible portion back into another 401k if you
mhm.
want to. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't rule it out completely. I think
No,
that
I just had to ask. And then one of the last questions before we take a quick break here is, as long as you're working, if you know what, let's say you're 85 and you've got a 401k and you're still working there and all your money's sitting in the 401k, do you have to take a required minimum distribution?
ooh, there's a lot to unpack there on that one. In as long as you're still working, I don't think that's going to matter. And we're assuming it's in the 401k still.
Yes, all in the 401k.
Exactly. So as long as it's still in the 401k, I think you'd be all right. All right. When you
Perfect.
start pulling it out of that 401k, you start to lose protections that are there. Uh,
Yeah. Okay, I just want to make sure. Hey, folks, stick with us. This is great information from Stephan. We'll be right back with more Saving with Steve and Stephan Shipe, sorry. We'll edit that. Okay, so next we're going to go into Roth conversions, timings, and all that stuff. Would you mind talking about um, many people were saying, hey, there's a lot of marketing that's going along with Roth conversions. Why is now the time to think about it? Because they're getting bombarded with all that kind of stuff. Why is now the time to think about it? Is it the right thing for them? What should people be thinking? How should they be looking at the planning side of this? That's the big
yeah,
questions that are coming up next. So
absolutely.
here we go. Hey folks, welcome. Oh, sorry, Cameron. We're episode 246. Stephan Shipe. We're moving into segment 3. So, hey, welcome back to the Saving with Steve show, where we talk about the ins and outs of money. We're just gonna get right to it. We have Stephan Shipe. We are talking right now about Roth conversions, Roth conversion timing. Is it right for everybody? Does it make sense? What should people be looking at? So, edit that, Cameron. Stephan, could you just talk to us about what a Roth conversion is? What should we be looking at? The timing issue, because nothing's right for everybody. And then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much to jump into. think the real basics, start real basic on the Roth conversion side, and we can get into the nuance of it because it is probably one of the more complicated areas of a personal financial plan. That the actual process is not complicated. It's actually really easy. We'll talk about, but it is so tailored to every individual circumstance. And I think that's what throws a lot of confusion out there because it is something that requires a little bit more strategy to it. The idea of a Roth conversion is that when you go and add money to a traditional 401k or traditional IRA and choose a tax deferred option, you're making a deal with the government, right? You make a deal with the government that says, I won't pay the tax now, but I promise in the future, I'm going to pay tax on this. And the hope is that you drop into a low tax bracket later on, right, in retirement, and you'll be able to pay lower taxes. That's the pitch that's given. That's the deal you make with the government. The government will always take your money sooner rather than later if you're willing to do so, right? So if you ever want to convert your money from traditional IRA or 401k over to a Roth, then you can just move money from your traditional IRA. Say, I want to move 100 grand from over here, and I'm going to put 100 grand over in my Roth IRA. And the government says that's completely fine. You just have to pay us the tax that you promised you'd pay us in the future, right, on that conversion. And where that becomes kind of a mess from a strategy perspective is, and you immediately can see this is, well, what tax bracket does that $100,000 conversion that I just did push me into? And that's all where the strategy starts to come in and saying, how do we structure these types of conversions so that way you can move money from tax deferred over to tax free through a Roth when you're at low tax brackets? So could you retire a little earlier? You have zero income that year. Maybe you live off some cash that you had in your emergency fund or live off cash that you have on the side. Your income is nothing, but you go convert $150,000 from tax deferred to Roth, gladly paying, 10, 12% on that money, as opposed to waiting until later in your 70s when you're forced to take the distributions. And this is why, to your point, Stephen, this is why I think that there's so much activity around marketing and everything around Roth conversions right now, because I know you hear it, I hear it. And if everyone's worried about, I get all these pitches and free steak dinners telling me about my Roth conversions that I can do. And it's all the same stuff, right? It's all the same pitch. And you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's not necessarily wrong, but it is starting to become, I think, on the forefront of people's minds because they're getting into a point of RMDs. They're starting to hear friends hit RMDs. They're starting to get hit with RMDs. There's this ticking time bomb that goes off in your 70s. And basically going back to this concept of the government says you're allowed to defer that tax until later. Well, it's not an indefinite deferral, right? What's going to happen is you get into your 70s and there's going to be a time where you have to hit required minimum distributions or RMDs. Right now, it varies similar to Social Security, but 75 is what it's converged to. And at 75, the government looks at their watch and says, hey, you promised that you were going to start taking distributions out of these accounts. That's why we gave you the tax break. Now we're going to start forcing you to start taking these distributions. That's what scares a lot of people, as it should, because now you're forced to take distributions from these accounts over a compressed period of time because you're using the IRS actuarial tables, and it's going to push you up into these higher tax rates. It's not uncommon. We see it all the time where someone has gone their entire life in let's say a 24% tax bracket, and then now R&Ds kick in and they're at a 35% tax bracket or 32% tax bracket because all of their savings is tax deferred and taxable, and they've just been living off of the taxable brokerage account, and they've got this large account that is going to be affected by RMDs. So Roth conversions can help with that because Roth IRAs are not subject to the RMDs. Why would they be? They've already been taxed. Mm-hmm. So when you retire, you start looking at, you really want to take advantage of low income years and say, I'm in a low bracket. Instead of being super excited about the low bracket, you look at it and say, I'm a low bracket. I'm going to take advantage of this by converting some of this money over. So that way I'm reducing that tax deferred bucket that's out in the future, moving more of that to Roth, and subsequently reducing my RMDs that I'm going to be faced with.
Now, so for example, many people are asking about their earnings Medicare tax, IRMA.
Yep.
And how there's an additional cost that plays into that if you're doing that conversion. And how should people be looking at that as related to the cost, your taxes and stuff like that when it comes to a Roth conversion?
Yeah, there's really two areas, and you're hitting the spots of why this starts to make people nervous around and the need for this goes back to the very beginning of why we need a strategy because you hit retirement, and before retirement you're saving, you just have to worry about 401ks are the only types of acronyms you have to know. You go to retirement planning and you start getting thrown this like alphabet soup of IRMA, RMDs, FRAs, and QCDs, and all these things start being thrown. You're like, what is going on? The that is true. So when you make these Roth conversions, you're going to increase your income. And there's penalties for having higher income outside of just taxes. You have IRMA, which is an additional Medicare tax that gets thrown on. You have issues related to Social Security taxation, all of these factors. So when you think about Roth conversions, that's really where it's important to start mapping all this out. So, I mean, to put this in perspective, when we're trying to make those types of decisions, we're going in and estimating what we think tax rates would be every single year for someone's entire life, as odd as that sounds. So we can look forward and say, this is where we think you might be on a tax perspective.
Mhm.
So we can work backwards and say, what, that IRMA that you're going to pay now, it's probably worth it because you're going to save $60,000 in tax from a Roth conversion. I'd say the other side of that, the interesting side that we've seen is people who are retiring before 65, depending on what the mix of assets look like, sometimes it doesn't make sense at all to do Roth conversions because you keep your income low and you have ACA credits and everything that can be used to offset the medical costs that you're going to be dealing with. That one has been common over the past few years as an option, but you have to have the right mix of cash
Mhm.
you can spend with lower income.
So what you're really saying is, you know what, it might not make sense for you to do Roth conversion because you're actually going to be in a lower tax bracket just by taking your RMDs. And you'll be better off just by doing that for the rest of your life as opposed to doing that conversion because there's no real benefit from a financial standpoint or a tax standpoint.
Absolutely, it could, right? It really depends on what tax bracket you're going to end up falling into at that point, especially if you're already looking at RMDs.
Hmm.
It ends up being harder to justify a large Roth conversion at that point because you're already being pushed up into a bracket. So now you're going to be pushed up even higher. That's where it becomes risky. The other situation to take into account, though, is if you're in that situation where RMDs are a pain for you, what that normally means is you likely had assets outside of your IRAs that you could use. And if
Hmm.
you're solely using your 401k or your IRA for income, then the RMDs aren't really going to be impacting you very much because you're still going to need a distribution anyways from that IRA to live off of. What I think is kind of to your point, you're going to be using it anyways. Where I see the most pain with RMDs is when someone doesn't need it. Like I have money in other accounts. I have Social Security payments. I have a pension. I receive inheritance. I have all this. I don't need my IRA money, but now I'm forced to take this RMD. So what they don't take into account though is that doesn't stop at your generation. In fact, it gets worse for the next generation. And
Hmm.
the RMDs are not only your problem, your kid's problem too, because when you inherit an IRA, you have to now take required minimum distribution. You have to drain that account over 10 years. So it's an even more compressed timeline. And when do you typically inherit? You typically inherit in your highest earnings years. So you're already in a high bracket now. And now you've inherited an IRA with a large RMD, and that money is being depleted quickly in tax. So you almost have to take a step back and say, you're not only looking at the tax implications of your finances, but also the tax implications of your family finances. In other words, you start looking less at the use of money for you now, but more the longevity of your money through time,
Hmm.
through generations.
I think this is wonderful you say that because one of the notes from one of our viewers was, I just inherited a $3.5 million IRA,
Yep.
and my returns are about 10% a year. So I'm going to have to take out about 375 to $400,000 a year to completely deplete this over the next 10 years. And because of my income, my pension, and everything else, I'll lose half of it to taxes.
You got it. Yeah, and
And
those are weird situations because then you start looking at like, should you just retire? You're almost forced to retire, take a sabbatical, just so you could drop into a lower bracket and keep more of the money.
yeah, that. And what was really interesting is, the timing's not always right for everybody. But one I think the questions that people might want to ask themselves is, how do I want this to transition off to the kids I love? Because the reality is, if you have to take it out over 10 years, but it's tax free for 10 years,
Yep.
you can do a lot to building something up and then take it all out and it's tax free. And that there's, wow, I love that. But you know what? You also have people who like are 75 that have life expectancy might get them to 90 and they can, does it make sense to start looking at that for people?
It may, right? Especially depending on what those RMDs are. And I think another way to think about that to that point. So 75, you're considering Roth conversions, you already have RMDs. Basically, should you do some bonus Roth conversions on top of the RMDs during that time? One question that I would say to ask is, what do you feel tax rates are going to be in the future? I think it's really easy for us to look and say, well, I'm in a 12% bracket now. So I think I'll stay in a 12% bracket in that situation, or I'm in 24, I'm going to stay in 24. The assumption there is that tax brackets in general are going to stay the same over the next 10 to 20 years. And I see that commonly where somebody says, especially younger clients, they'll look at it and say, I'm in my 40s, 50s, I'm in this bracket, so I'm going to be in a lower bracket when I retire. And we look at the numbers, say, well, on your income, using current brackets, you may be dropping into a lower bracket, but that's assuming the tax brackets don't change. And when you look at historical tax brackets in the United States, we're still at historically pretty low tax brackets, which is not the most comforting thing for people to hear. But when you look back at the 1950s Eisenhower administration, when your marginal tax brackets got up into the high 90%.
Mm-hmm.
So it would not be unheard of for us to see higher tax brackets out into the future. So another way to think about Roth conversions is really a hedge against future tax rates increases as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Hey, folks, stick with us. We're going to be right back with more Stephan Shipe. This is wonderful. Perfect. We're moving in the last segment. I want to talk about your thought of stress testing a retirement plan before making a leap. And then it's just going to be about, little things that people should know. You've basically answered pretty much all, there might have been 1,500 questions, but you've already answered them because I knew you probably would, just because you've done this before and you're a teacher and everything. But the big thing is the need for stress testing
Yep.
and why it makes a difference, how come, what the outcomes if you don't do that, that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Hey, Cameron, we're moving into segment 4 with Stephan Shipe and episode 246. So here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back to the Saving with Steve show. I truly want to thank you for tuning in and appreciate you letting your friends and family and associates know about our show. Again, all the replays are available at savingwithsteve.us. If you're enjoying stories of helpful information, insight on Saving with Steve, then I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Never miss a show by checking out a few of our affiliates at UK Health Radio, BBS Radio, Talk Radio in New York City, Las Vegas Network. All these networks dedicated to empowering you to solve problems, uplift your spirit, live a life of personal and financial freedom. With that, we're right back here with Stephan Shipe. It's Scholar Financial Advising. You can see it right in the screen there. He runs this wonderful firm that has, clients from all over the country. But right now, we want to talk about stress testing retirement plans. Many people don't realize this or realize it too late, where they go, hey, that sounds good, let's go do that. Or they get it in their head, this is the direction they want to go to, and they've never really done some stress testing on what their plan is, whether it be taxes, investments, otherwise, on their retirement, and so on. And you know what? It creates a problem for them. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of stress testing, what it is, how it works. What would be, you've been around a while, so you've probably seen the implications of people not doing things like that. And so if you can, I'm going to kind of give you the floor and just let you talk, because I think it's an important thing for people to understand.
Yeah. So when we think about finance, right, one of the issues that comes up when you're planning for retirement, what we see is that it's really easy to look at something and say, well, I think the stock market has an average 7% return or 8% return. And then they don't look at the fact that they're going to have a portfolio that is also bonds, right? And fixed income, not just stocks. So now their average return may be 6%. And then they look, and I see these charts all the time, and our clients typically have a lot of spreadsheets that they're working on and testing their own stuff. And you have this perfect straight line that says, well, I have $1 million and it's going to have a 6% return. So I'm going to be able to spend $60,000. Or I've got $10 million and I'm going to be able to spend $600,000 every single year, right, throughout retirement. The problem with that is that it's assuming that the account will always have positive returns of exactly 6%. And I think everyone knows that that's not how the stock market works. Right? The stock market's going to move up and down. So the way you handle that decision of whether or not you should retire is through stress testing and simulation, right? We want to basically embrace randomness. We want to embrace the idea that the market does move up and down. And instead of saying, I'm going to have this perfect straight line that the market's going to return X% every year, instead we look at it and say, well, what if we start today and what if the market's up next year by 10%? And then what if it drops by 15%? And then it's up by 3%. And then it's down by 8%. And we draw this jagged line all the way out the rest of your life and say, were you able to make it through retirement without running out of money with this jagged line? And then if the answer is yes, you get a nice check mark for it. And then you have to go back and say, well, there was a lot of assumptions that were made of returns, but what if we were wrong and the market's not up next year, it's actually down? Well, now you have a whole new line that you're drawing. So a good way to handle the base simulation is to run that, 1,000 different times. It's the fancy name for that is called a Monte Carlo simulation. Right? It's basically analysis, 1,000 different ways. And you take all this into account and you want to have you want to see how many times out of 1,000 you can make it through all these different scenarios without running out of money. So in that scenario, that would be first, right? We want to have a base scenario that we have with all these simulations, and then we start to stress test it. And sometimes I joke that that's our job. Our job is to see how far we can push that scenario before it starts to break. And breaking points are important because it starts to tell you where the floors are and ceilings are for spending, for saving, for all of these different scenarios. So common things you want to stress test against is the most risky time of retirement is your first year you retire, right? Because that's your longest time horizon that your account has to work the hardest from that point on. So what's the worst case scenario? You're having your retirement party and next day the market drops 30%. That's the worst case scenario. That's what everyone worries about. So, and rightfully so, because now that scenario has 30% less. You're going to be drawing money from a portfolio that's now smaller. And you don't have time to say, well, let's wait 4 or 5 years. Market's going to recover and then we'll be okay. You're going to be pulling from it anyways. So it's important to stress test against that. How does your portfolio do if that happens? How does it do if you have a cut in Social Security? How does it do if tax rates go up by 5%, 10%? And how does it do with long-term care costs in the future? So we want to have all of these different hits to the portfolio to say, is it still surviving these? And then in times where the stress tests show weakness, then we go back and say, well, how do we mitigate that risk? So the example we just gave, if we look at a stress test that says a 30% drop on your portfolio year one doesn't look so hot, that's not going to do good. So then what can we do? Maybe we focus on building up some liquidity in those years before retirement. We build up some cash. We build up so you have a year or two worth of expenses outside of your accounts. So that way, if the market does drop that amount, well, you can go pull some of that cash and live off that and give yourself some time for the markets to recover. Do we have a plan in place, almost like an emergency action plan for your portfolio in these type of stress tests? And the stress testing allows you to pull those together and say, it's great to have a strategy for when everything goes great, but what are the scenarios that could go wrong? How bad are they? Right? How bad could they be for the portfolio? And the ones that are going to actually be bad, how do we mitigate that risk, or how can we reduce the chance of that being a problem?
See, I was just thinking in my head, I was like, okay, so that's like saying, hey, I have $1 million my first year and the market just went down 30%. I've got 700,000. I have to take out 40,000 because that's my 4%. So now, the market goes up, but I still have to take out that 40,000. So where am I going to be 4 or 5 years down the road? Am I going to be back up to my million, or am I, how does that affect me? And like you said, hey, do I have liquidity? What if I have a health issue? What those things are the things that people need to be thinking about with a portfolio as opposed to just having a portfolio. Am I right on the same page there with you?
Absolutely. No, I think that that's a great way to think about it. And then the other thing is that it's dynamic. It's a dynamic decision-making process in the sense that it's good to plan ahead, but it's also opportunities for if the market drops 30%, do you go rebalance your portfolio? And do you go sell bonds first out of the portfolio so that way your equity percentage becomes higher when the market's lower, which sounds counterintuitive when you look at it, but it's essentially the old
Mark,
buy low, sell high in the market, right? You're rebalancing to add weight into those. So there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate that. What you want to make sure you're doing is planning ahead of time before you make the leap to say, if this were to happen, do I even have an exit door? Right? Is there an even a door that exists that I can go through? Because in some cases, which we've seen, somebody goes and retires and they don't take that into account. Say, if you have a bad year, you're going to have major changes to your lifestyle. We're going to have to cut expenses. You're not going to be able to do the traveling that you want to do early in retirement. Because that's the problem is the 4% rule, everything is great. It's based on, it'd be hard to argue that it's based on academic literature, right? Back in the 90s on. But the issue is that spending is usually non-linear throughout retirement. That what happened first year of retirement, no one says, well, the first year I'm going to retire, my plan is to do nothing. I'm just going to stay home. That's the year
yeah.
of the big trip, right? That's the year of like,
The
oh,
big trip, the remodel, all that kind of stuff.
exactly, right? It's all the big fun stuff that happens. So your spending is more than 4% the first year, and then it tapers down. So it may average at 4%. But what does that do to the scenario we just told? So now market drops 30%. You're not just pulling your 4%, you're pulling 4% and the remodel and the travel and all of this, or you're not doing any of those things. And all of those things are going to have to be delayed. So that has to be planned for. You have to plan for those types of issues. And unfortunately, you generally retire once, right? So you're retiring one time. So you don't have the experience to look back on and say, well, in the past 4 times I retired, I learned that I have to keep enough liquidity for the trip or for the remodel ahead of time because I'm not going to be able to get out of that hole. And that's
I,
where the advantage of having a strategy built ahead of time really comes into play.
I just want to share something with one of our, not with, but from one of our viewers. Basically, he indicated that he basically retired just before '08. And when '08 hit, took everything out of the market, put it in CDs, and basically has pretty much stayed safe. And because he stayed safe, he's now 74 right now and going back to work. And the reason why he's going back to work is because the Social Security income from his wife's portion of the Social Security went away when she passed away. So he's, doing stuff he hasn't done in 10, 12 years just because he, didn't have the right plan, didn't stress test it, didn't know what to do if this were to occur, and then have that extra set aside just in case it did occur.
Yeah. And he's in an odd way, he's kind of a lucky one that he was able to go back to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the problem with a retirement that was poorly timed. And
Mm-hmm.
the issue there is that you leave typically at a time where you are at the pinnacle of your earnings years. You're at a position that doesn't have you're at the top of the corporate ladder, so to speak, right? Where those are not common positions that you can just hop back into, right? You leave that position, the company backfills that position, you have gone, and then 2 to 3 years later, you can't just hop into that role again, right? In many cases, that's not how it works. So now you have to hop into a role at a lower income, right? Or are in a different position than you were at before, both from a job responsibility and income perspective. So it's a big decision. There are risks there besides just I can hop back into work. That's a hard assumption to make.
I'm gonna say he's one of the few lucky ones, because if you think about not being in the workplace for 5 or 6 or 7 years, so much has changed. The knowledge that's required in order to do the things that they're just required nowadays are different. The technology is different. Everything sleeps in bounds. So he's just very, very, very lucky. So I just wanted to share that. Now, we're almost done with our time. Stephan, I want to thank you so much for sharing this information today. But you know what? I know you have clients all over the country. If somebody wants to reach out, use your services, how can they get connected with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is our website, scholarfinancialadvising.com. And they can hop on there. We have tons of resources available, blogs, podcasts, newsletters, anything to be able to reach out, connect to us would be great. We'd love to hear from you.
That's wonderful. Hey, folks, we're also going to have that on our website. So if you go to the Saving with Steve US website, you're going to see this episode. This episode's 246, Stephan Shipe. You'll be able to get that information there. You might even have a few extra resources that can help you as well. So, Stephan, I want to thank you so much for being here. Again, Scholar Financial Advising. You're getting a PhD. This is wonderful. So reuse the resource because it's, there's some really some nice things that can come of it. So again, thanks for being with us today on Saving with Steve. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer. All
As well. Thanks for having me.
right, perfect. Here we go. Okay, I have a little exit and then add on to that. So, hey, I want to thank you for being here. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, this
Uh,
was fantastic. Thank you so much. This is
I'm
great.
just going to say this. The cool thing about people who teach constantly is I don't have to ask them many questions and I just let them talk because they're already answering everybody's questions. So I look like this, you know, genius, but I'm not because the reality is we got you know, well over we typically get about 600 emails, but this one was over 1,000. So it's one of those things where we have a large portion of people, and it takes a lot for somebody to send an email in reference to a show.
Yeah,
Uh, it takes a lot. Uh, and some people are very frustrated, and some of the questions I asked were based off their frustration, so they can get dealt with. Because I know it's like little kids in the sandbox, and mom's asking if somebody's eating crayons, and then they find out that all the kids are eating crayons. So everybody's in the same deal. So that's the reason why I ask, because there's so many people are experiencing the same stuff. So, but with that, I'm going to let you go. You have a great day, and thanks again for being
you
here
as
with
well.
us.
It was great. It was
Um,
great to meet you.
It'll
And
take about a couple days for it to get edited. You'll get the edited copy, the unedited copy. You'll get the graphic, which I think you already have. And this will air approximately 11 days from today on a Tuesday, beginning in Florida and come all the way through the United States on radio shows. And a
okay,
couple days after that, it'll go to 150 streaming sites. And then about a week and a half after that, it'll go to UK Health Radio, which it'll go through 56 countries and 8 different time zones.
very cool.
So you're going to get a lot of exposure. Don't be surprised if things trickle in or get slammed. You never know how it happens with this. I had one person says, I got nothing. And then a year later, all of a sudden I got all this stuff. So sometimes it's just timing. But right now, I think there's more timing for what you're talking about than anything else, especially with all the uncertainty that's rolling around right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been fantastic. It's been great to meet you. And like I said, I appreciate you having me on.
And you know what? Have your PR person keep coming up with stuff because I
Yeah,
like
you
to do
will. Yes.
financial stuff. You're great. You're really smooth. I can tell people are going to connect with you. So I'd like to have you back again if that's all right.
Absolutely. I would love to. Happy to. And we'll come up with some ideas and send them your way.
Sounds good. Hey, have a good day. See you,
Have a good
Stefan.
one. See ya.
Okay, let's see. All right, let's see. Okay. Hey, Cameron. I'm gonna kind of end things here and come back and close the show later with my last segment. So here we go. Just take this as a recording. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Folks, again, stick with us. We're going to be right back with more Staving with Steve. And again, I want to thank Stephan Shipe so much. You really want to go check out his website. You'll see the link on the savingwithsteve.us website. And with that, we'll be back shortly. Okay.